Yo, what is up, guys? Snap here. Today we're going to be talking about all of the builds we're going to be playing in the 327 Keepers of the Flame expansion. Going to be a little bit of a different league for me. I am actually not going to be playing. I'm going to be trading for the first couple days because I have a vacation to get to afterwards, so I don't want to commit to the full week, but I will be around for the first couple days, helping out with the boys, trading, that kind of thing. There are some important updates to all these builds. We also have reworked the Crybot a little bit. We're going to go in an unconventional order today and start out with the Crybot, or what used to be the Crybot. Anyways, let's jump right into it. So the first important piece of context to understand that is fueling or generating all of the changes to the party comp is the nerfs to Pyroclast Mines. Pyroclast Mines used to give an insane flat fire damage aura when placed, and we had an entire character that was built around throwing the mines and giving the biggest possible fire damage buff. This is no longer a thing. All it does is give you fire exposure. If we go back to a previous iteration of the carries in 326, we can see in our config here that we are giving a massive 5,000 to 6,000 fire damage buff here. This flat fire damage that was on the miner was just carrying the flat damage, and we basically built our entire comp around the fact that we didn't really need flat damage on gear or the Aurabot or anything like that. And so now with the removal of Pyroclast, we need to build the party a little bit differently with a more focus on flat damage. So since the 6th party slot, which used to be the miner, is no longer throwing Pyroclast mines, we're going to be rotating the war cries that previously used to be on slot number 3, rotating those war cries over to slot number 6, and now we have something new to do on this character, which is character number 3. We're calling it the Banner Fortify bot. So this character did a lot of what it did before, where it tries to stack frenzy charges, gets maximum fortify. It's a champion. It shares all of that fortify to the rest of your party. So we do the basics here. We click all the fortify nodes over here. We're a champion. We get all the frenzy charges. We equip replica badge to share all of those frenzies, which converts over to endurance, which shares us fortification. It's very straightforward. Additionally, we're still wearing stuff like ambush charge to share all of those max frenzies, which are converted to endurance to give us more DR. We then have a ring that gives us max frenzy. You can use a second ring that gives you max frenzy, or you can wear a manifold ring to help your personal ES pool. The rest of the fortify comes from a timeless jewel. This one has 5 fortify on it. You can get up to 8 in this socket, but anything with like 4 fortify, maybe 5 is probably where you want to be shooting for. There's a lot of good pathing nodes here. These charges you can click. There's some 2-pointers up here that you can click that are very good. A very good timeless jewel socket for you for fortify. This build, of course, is completely playable without these gloves. Now, the big thing that's going to change here is going to be the introduction of Beacon of Madness into the Fortify bot. There's a big change on Beacon of Madness where the debuff is now applied every 2 seconds instead of 1 second. Now, this is massive for a few reasons. Now, there is one variant of the Beacon of Madness that gives you 15 to max fortification while you're affected by Glorious Madness, which obviously 15 max fortification is just crazy because you can share that to your entire party. However, these boots do have a debilitating debuff that you need to get around. The Glorious Madness debuff causes you to gain a stack of random debuff every 2 seconds. The debuffs are as follows. Take 6% increased damage, 6% reduced action speed, 9% reduced flash charges, or 9% reduced recovery. This stacks up to 10 times, which is, 60% increased damage taken, 60% reduced action speed, 90% reduced flash charges, and 90% less recovery rate. These are debilitating debuffs if you allow these to stack up to 10. The way these work is if you get, let's say, eroding touch on the first roll of the debuff, if the second roll of the debuff is also eroding touch, it will refresh the stack timer, giving you 2 stacks and going back to a 20-second timer here. So there is a way with the changes in the patch notes to get around this debuff, and that is by stacking debuff expires faster on your character. This stat, which exists in a variety of places, you can see debuffs expire 30% faster on you, is the main stat that we're going to be trying to focus on so that we can bring down the stacks on this character to a manageable level. I want to shout out DK in my Discord here, who has made a little calculator to calculate the amount of debuffs that you'll have of each at particular debuff reduction percentages. I'm not going to go too in depth into the specifics on this calculator, but as you can see here, at this percent of debuff reduction, you'll have this many stacks on average. So the breakpoint we're trying to hit here is 151%, which will on average give us 2 stacks of each debuff. That means you'll be taking 12% increased damage, 12% reduced action speed, 18% reduced flash charges, and 18% reduced recovery rate. And if you're able to pull these boots off, you'll be able to give 65 fortify to your entire party, which is massive. 65% DR is just insanity. Now, all the sources of debuff reduction that we're going to be getting here is going to be on the rune graph. We have a little bit on this timeless jewel here, which is 10%. We have a Watcher's Eye socketed here, which is 20%. I just put it in the custom config because it's not calculating here. And then finally, finally, the best source of debuff reduction is going to be on Temporal Rift quality stacking here. When you reserve Temporal Rift, you get debuff reduction as just a global buff on your character, and you can scale that debuff reduction value with Enhance and other quality. You put a level 4 Enhance linked to the 2020 Temporal Rift. It is perfectly hitting the breakpoint if you have a max roll everything, and the last bit comes from a flow untethered, which is 19% here. All of the sources of debuff reduction can be found here in the other defenses in POB. The debuff duration multi, you can see the total sum of all of them here. With all of that together, you should be able to comfortably run Beacon of Madness. You don't need to do any weapon swapping stuff, turning them off to cleanse the stacks or any of those shenanigans. You're able to just run these cleanly. That is half of what this character is doing, right? We're just applying a massive 65 Fortify to the entire party. That's great. Now, the next thing that this character can do is banners. If you're familiar with some of where the meta of Aurabots and stuff, especially in Blight, you know that banners are going to be an extremely important part of any party composition. If we look at banners, we can see they get some pretty insane multipliers here. This is a 34x multiplier to the aura effect on this banner. The reason for that is banners get more aura effect per valor consumed, and you basically path to all of the max valor down here. Have 105 per banner that you cast. Also important to click all the other valor gain nodes over here, and we take one banner cluster down here, which is going to be rallying icon, which is important because the resistances give us damage on the carry, which we'll go over a little bit later. And then also we need a mastery, which gives us valor when we war cry. This is extremely important because this is our main source of valor generation. We're not doing any sort of attacking. All we're doing is war crying. That's all of our valor generation. Now, you want as much war cry CDR as possible because that will increase your valor gain. But since we are planning on doing Blight, this particular setup has less CDR but higher duration. You can see the banners have a pretty massive duration here on the Defiance banner at 50 seconds. It's way more than enough uptime to keep all of the banners up. If you are stationary doing something like Blight, just know that the ramp time is a little bit long. And here is a quick breakdown of the different amount of war cries that you can get and the amount of valor or time it takes to generate all of the valor. With 6 war cries, with the current setup, it's 22 seconds to generate all of the valor for the banners. And with 4 war cries, it'll be around 30 seconds to generate all the valor that you need. Now, you can invest a little bit more into the valor gain or the war cry cooldown. You know, there's a wheel up here that you can impossible escape, which is pretty good. So you can consider impossible escaping Eternal Youth, grabbing all the war cry stuff here. And the way you proc all of your banners is just going to be on an auto exert here. Auto exert does reserve a lot of your mana, so you don't really have a lot of room to reserve personal auras here. But you have 4 war cries here that are being auto exerted, and most importantly, General's Cry has the lowest cooldown. And then you have 1 manually pressed war cry, which is Enduring Cry. You can use it to regen if you need it, and it's kind of nice to have that extra regen, and that's why we don't put it on auto exert. But feel free to put it on auto exert if you feel like you don't need the extra regen or whatever. The rest of the skills here are uninteresting. We just take Molten Shell, cast when damage taken. You put on a mobility skill, great. It's kind of whatever, right? Now, as for the pathing on the tree, basically we take all the banner and war cry stuff at the bottom, as we mentioned, and then we're just pathing over to aura effect because this is multiplicative with the aura effect that's on the banner. And then I have opted to take this build to go CI. Now, you can play this life-based, and playing CI is just a little bit uncomfortable because you have so many uniques on. But I do think that life-based and CI-based builds are both viable. You can kind of take your pick. I do, however, think that the CI version of this build is a little reliant on Light of Meaning with Unnatural Instinct here to get a pretty healthy ES pool. If you do not have the Light of Meaning, your ES pool is going to be at 4.9k, which is by no means completely unplayable, but it's a little sketch is all. And then you're just clicking some ES wheels around the tree just to get your ES pool to a pretty healthy amount. Keep in mind, you do always have 65% damage reduction at all times, so, you know, 6.5k might not seem that high, but your defenses with the banners, block capping, suppress capping, you know, all of that good stuff with the Fortify, you're going to be extremely tanky when you're in the core and all of your buffs are up. And then real quick, a note about the flasks here. You do need to equip a Sorrow of the Divine to benefit from the Druggery's recovery. You're going to see this on every single build in the party. The Sorrow of the Divine is so that you can benefit from the recovery of the Druggery fort. But yeah, that mostly goes over the huge changes to the banner Fortify bot. And once again, we've rotated the war cries over to the Drugger here. So we're going to talk about this build next, which is the Crying Drugger. And it's important to talk about this build to give context to the decisions we're making of the rest of the builds. So we're going to go over this one next. Now, we have rotated the war cries over to the Druggery guy, and that means he needs to path over down to Duelist here and click all of the war cry clusters that are relevant. There are some war cry stuff up here by Marauder that is just a little too hard to path to, so I do think an impossible escape at Eternal Youth is mega value to hit this war cry wheel here. And then lastly, we can anoint the last war cry stuff over here. This build is still using the Druggery belt, which is providing the party with an insane amount of recovery. And the reason it's giving so much recovery is because we path to all of the life flask stuff on the tree here. We're also wearing a blood grip amulet, which gives us 100% increased life recovery from flask. And the recovery never turns off because we're a pathfinder with Master Surgeon. So the main goals of the build, of course, path to Warcry, path to flask stuff, put on a blood grip and a druggery so we have a ton of recovery. It is mandatory for us to equip a red blade so our war cries are always infinite power. And then we can equip a rebuke of the Vol if we want to use rallying cry to give our carry a lot more flat damage. Now, one direction I decided to take this build was to go low life with a coruscating elixir. Because this is a pathfinder and you're already clicking all of the flask stuff to give powerful flask to your allies, it just makes sense to go coruscating elixir in order to proc the buff here, which is 130% more recovery if used on low life. This is a massive boon to the recovery rate. You can see I have 7,900 recovery. It's a little bit less than traditional druggery POBs, which are, you know, maybe 20,000 if you actually completely min-max the recovery. But this character has all of the war cries and it has, you know, a pretty respectable amount of recovery as well. The rest of the gear is really just whatever ES gear that you want to equip to make your ES pool pretty healthy. This is sitting around 8k. Does have a light of meaning with the unnatural instinct socket, of course, because it's very, very, very powerful in this socket. If you don't have a light of meaning, you're at 6k. Very playable. Definitely don't need this to make the build function. The rest of the stuff is just trying to get suppress capped here. I take Mage Bane, take the Innervate, Betterate Cluster, and get Lucky Suppress. Just very easy clicks here. Now, gonna quickly go over the socket groups. It's a little bit complicated because you have a bunch of red sockets on your war cries, but your chess piece is going to be an ES base. So I do think it's, you know, going to be worth it to try and split out some of these red socket groups, which means you're going to have 3 different war cry groups. You're going to have on your body armor a 4 link, which is just 4 red. All of the war cries are going to be linked to more duration urgent orders because you want it to be not clunky and you want to have a lot of duration on the war cries to make sure your buffs have high uptime. This is the first socket group. You have a second socket group, which is rallying enduring, and then you have an intimidating cry only if you really want to have the movement speed. If you're doing blight and you feel like you really don't care about the movement speed at all, feel free to drop this particular setup because intimidating cry isn't really offering you that much. It'll be one less button to click as well. I do think it's worth trying to jam in the rallying cry because every bit of flat damage I think does matter with the removal of Pyroclast Mine. Before with Pyroclast, it would just supersede absolutely every other source of flat damage and it was just kind of whatever, but I do think now you should make the extra effort to put on a Rebuke of the Vol or whatever other one hand that has a lot of flat damage and then cast rallying cry to give your carry a little bit of extra flat that it is now missing as a result of the nerfs of Pyroclast. The rest of the stuff is just going to be personal utility / mobility, flame dash, link to brutality so you don't kill stuff, you know, culling, yada yada. You have personal auras, purity of elements, flesh and stone, so you take a little bit less damage. You can run a very high level vitality and also put discipline on arrogance. We want to reserve our life so that we're always low life, even with the coruscating. This way we can proc the flask consistently. We do also have to put on a Sorrow of the Divine to make it so our life recovery from flask applies to our ES. You're going to see this once again on every single character. Then we have a guard skill, nothing too interesting here. And this goes over most of the changes to the druggery. So now let's move on to the carry and the Aurabot, you know, which is kind of the star of the show here. So as for our carry, we are going to be going armor stacking. Big surprise. If you're in a 6-man, armor stacking is just by far and away the best, you know, most damage, most tanky, bang for your buck that you can get in 6-man. Now in lower party sizes, you can do different carry options with wands, bows, or even spells, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But if you're in a party size of 4 or above, or even 3, you can justify going armor stacker, especially if you're planning on doing stationary content like Blight, which I do think will be pretty meta this league. In order to explain some of the gearing choices, we first have to talk about Reave of Refraction. Now, this is going to be somewhat new to people who are playing, you know, stuff like Lightning Strike or Smite of Divine Judgment, that kind of thing. Reave of Refraction is a little bit new. There's one thing you need to know about Reave of Refraction and the motivations behind playing it, and that is going to be the AOE, which as you can see here is just bomba. Can't even see where the edge stops. A 15.6 meter radius is just insane. Of course, the AOE effect modifier is times 50. It takes a little bit of explaining how to get here. First things first, we are playing an armor stacker, so there are things we kind of have to put on. There's going to be Dream Feathers, a Formless Flame, a Perfect Form, Southbound so we don't kill stuff to enable the culling setup. We have a Tides of Time for our powerful flasks, and then we have Amethyst Rings to cap out our Chaos Res. That's kind of the basics of the gear, right? The other thing to talk about on the tree here is we want to get as much AOE on our mediums as possible, and we're also pathing to as much AOE on the tree as possible here with this melee AOE cluster brinkmanship. So we have a pretty heavy focus on AOE on on all of the clusters and most of the pathing. It's something we're trying to maximize here. Pretty cookie cutter armor stacker stuff here. Of course, iron reflexes, we take some life, we take our frenzy charge, you know, it's a little bit of extra damage. We do need a source of mana leech, and I do think this extra leech is instant is super good for your mana costs. We have the one sword wheel fatal blade over here just because it's extremely good damage. Now we need to talk about Reave mechanics, snapshotting, and why quality is so important and why we have an Ashes equipped. I'll link this video by 3.8 which explains the mechanics behind snapshotting Reave, but essentially you have to weapon swap to a quality weapon. Use Vol Reave to stack up to 21 stages with a bunch of quality on your local sword, and then once you weapon swap back to your normal Reave that is 6 linked, the stages are snapshotted at max, which gives you a ton of AoE. And if you have all of that going, you can see here that in this particular blight, he's able to attack just, you know, screens away and still hit the blight mobs, which is kind of the main motivation to go Reave. Just the AoE is just so insane. Quality of life is just so insane. Coupled with the damage of an armor stacker, it's going to be a very, very good play style. So once again, in order to get all of that AoE, we need as much quality on our weapon swap. We're going to be wanting to make a sword like this. It starts off with a synth weapon. Now this is going to be Bis. This is a double synth weapon, but it is absolutely not necessary to start out with something like this. It's important to know that Reave only works with one-handed swords, so you need to make sure that your synth base is a one-handed sword. We've chosen a jeweled foil here. You want to use faceted fossils here to get +1 dex gems, and then you want to isolate the dex gems down, and then you want to harvest craft speed mods on here. I believe this is typically done with suffixes cannot be changed, harvest, add speed until you hit the other level. Then you multi-mod and add the +2 socketed support and plus a quality of socketed. Those are kind of the basics of crafting a sword like this. Then in your offhand, of course, you just put a level 4 enhance, you put it on the Vol Reave here, combined with an Ashes in the amulet slot here. This quality is 108%, or plus 108% rather, and this allows you to hit 21 stages of Vol Reave. Once again, once you have it stacked to 21 after pushing Vol Reave, you weapon swap back to your main hand, which has the Dream Feathers on, and you can benefit from all of the supports while maintaining all of the stages. Now, in the POB, I'd put just a ton of quality here because all that matters is the stages, which is 21. The quality is just letting me put the stages at 21, so just know that's why the quality is here like it is. So without snapshotting, you're going to be at 9 stages, which has an AoE like this, but with snapshotting, you're at 21 stages, and your AoE is going to look like this. So just know that's your AoE with and without snapshotting. Going over the rest of the gear, we have Ashes, of course, for the quality. We have Amethyst rings here with minus channeling. The mana cost on Reave is kind of insane, and we are using a technology to run a Sap of the Seasons, and that is going to require us to put on Power of Purpose. With the removal of Doriani Mercs, and we do not have fire damage, which means we can't use Enmity's Embrace, we need a source of lightning penetration, and there aren't very many great sources of it. The best source, of course, is to go back to Sap of the Seasons, and the way you can run this consistently is on mana, and we remove all of our mana with Power of Purpose. We have 142 mana. You can put on minus mana Kalandra Jewelry here, but I've opted not to because it's just a little annoying to obtain. And if you put on a Enduring Eternal Mana Flask, you are able to sustain hundreds of stacks pretty easily with this amount of mana. Right now I have on, I believe, 250 mana burn, and I still have, you know, net positive mana recovery. If you can be asked to get your mana down with minus Kalandra Jewelry, you can easily run up to like, you know, 300, 400, 500 stacks without too much trouble. Tides of Time is extremely nice here for the uptime on the mana flask, as well as your other flasks getting the benefit of increased flask effect. The suffixes here are a lot of damage on your armor stacker. You can see each one is like, you know, 30% damage or whatever. So having the extra flask effect here on Tides of Time goes a very long way as well. Last thing to mention here is going to be the Storm Rider boots. Now, the Storm Rider boots are extremely important because this is yet another source of flat damage we're adding to the build that we are now missing as a result of the Pyroclast Mine nerfs. This gives you 1 to 6 added lightning damage per 200 accuracy, and we have a shit ton of accuracy because of War Banner from the Banner bot. If we quickly flip over to the Banner Fortify bot here, we can see on the War Banner itself, we have a 34x multiplier on it, and the War Banner buff gives us more or increased accuracy to you and allies. So we're giving something, you know, like 300% or 250% increased accuracy, which is a shit ton. The Rallying Cry plus the Storm Rider boots plus the Aurabot running Wrath and or Smite if you need it is going to be all of your sources of flat damage, and it's going to be majority lightning, which is why we have to use Sapped for our penetration needs. To go over most of the skills and stuff, there is one last thing to mention here, and that is going to be a General's Cry setup. This is an extreme amount of single target if you need it. If you're doing something like Blight, this might not be completely necessary, but if you really want a shit ton of single target, 4-link here with General's Cry, Auto Exert, Volatility, Blade Flurry, this 4-link is going to be insane. In order for this to calc correctly in the config at the bottom, I put -3 to maximum Mirage Warriors, and in the config of Blade Flurry, you need to put on channel and release at 10 stages. Something a little bit extra, but you know, if you are fully ramped, it is actually more damage than your fully channeled Reave anyways. So this is, if you need extra single target, this is definitely what you want to set up here. Rest of the sockets here aren't too interesting. Blood Rage, attack speed, frenzy charges, whatever, great. Molten Shell, cast when damage taken, has a purity for its elemental resistances needs. Pet Blood, you know, enlighten because you need it for your RMR. And yeah, I think that goes over most of the gearing here on the carry. One last thing here is the Anoint is Cannibalistic Rite. We have extreme mana problems on our mana cost of the skill, and we are anointing this for the mana cost because if we have 142 max mana and we're reserving a decent amount of it as well, hard to get the mana cost of the skill to be below your maximum mana. This is going to be fine if we can cast it once with all of our insta leech, but just know it can be a little bit of a problem here if you know, your mana cost is going to be a little bit tight. So this Anoint I think goes a long way. And additionally, changing the cost to be somewhat on life also helps ease the burden as well. There is one last interaction here I want to point out between the banner Fortify bot and the carry, and that is of course going to be Rallying Icon. You have such an insane multiplier on your banners, you know, it's like 40 or 30 or whatever it is here. This Rallying Icon will get multiplied by that, and so each banner is going to be giving us something like 175 resistances, which we can see here. Each one is 170, 170, 156, and this does stack per banner you put down. This is important for the carry because we are wearing Formless Flame and Replica Perfect Form, which gives us increased armor per overcapped resistances. So, you know, plus 600 resistances is pretty fucking crazy in this setup. You can see here we're sitting at like 600%, 600%, 645%. Very, very powerful interaction. Anyways, that's enough about the carry. Let's move on to the Aurabot here. Now, we have made some adjustments because we are planning on being in a stationary party doing Blight. So there is going to be a return of March of the Legion here. The reason March of the Legion used to be Cancer, and the reason why we used to avoid doing this is because in order to run this, you had to use Soulcatcher plus Lavianjas, and it's just super fucking annoying. But with the addition of Whispers of Infinity Amulet, which was added last league, you can now put on this amulet, sacrifice a little bit of aura effect, and that lets you run March of the Legion, which will let you juice the levels on whatever auras you want. So we have a pretty standard Aurabot tree here. We are still going to be going Scion because, one, I think it's really easy to get a ton of EHP, has good pathing, it has plus passive points, and if there's a good ascendancy here, what we can do is drop 3 passive points because this isn't the most powerful thing in the world, and then we can use those 2 passive points to grab one of the new Bloodline ascendancies if they're powerful. So you grab all the aura stuff. We are using large clusters here to get spell block cap, RMR on all the clusters. You're taking Iron Reflexes because you are using an Aegis. Very, very straightforward stuff here. I like this Timeless Jewel location at the top left, grabbing these 2 here because it's a very low amount of points, but there are other options and other sockets, but I typically am looking for a very low passive point Timeless Jewel with 24%. Getting spell block, RMR up here, going CI, grabbing the aura cluster here, and we are grabbing this instinct cluster to help out our spell suppression situation here. Not too many interesting things going on in the tree. It is worth pointing out, if you haven't seen here, the Unnatural Instinct Light of Meaning interaction here. This is just, you know, an insane wheel for ES. You can see I have 10,600 without the Light of Meaning. It goes to 7,000. So, you know, this is definitely worth paying the money for. It is a substantial amount of your ES pool. So on this character, we are block and spell block capped. It is Glancing Blows, so it's a little bit fake, of course, but we do have a good amount of spell suppression. We have a very healthy ES pool, and we have enough armor to completely basically regain all of our ES whenever we block, so it's very, very powerful. So going on about the gear, Dark Seer +2, very mandatory because it's very annoying to get +2 on your purities otherwise, and getting the level 23 purities, of course, gives you a breakpoint for the max res, so Dark Seer is pretty irreplaceable in my opinion. For the helmet, we are going for an RMR helmet over an aura effect helmet. The reason for that is because we want to be getting a pseudo gem level helmet here, but there's going to be 2 main things we want to juice the level of on Aurabot, and that's going to be Wrath, and the second one's going to be Grace. Grace. So you're going to choose to put either Wrath in the helmet or Grace in the helmet. And it depends on, you know, how safe you want to be. I don't prefer to put Grace in the March of the Legion because I always want the Grace to be on. I don't want it to ever drop because it can be very dangerous for the party if it drops. So I think getting a helmet with these kind of pseudo levels, getting the Grace to like, you know, level 31 or whatever I can muster is good enough. And then I can put a Wrath in the March of the Legion. It is pretty free to press this. You don't need to mess around with any, you know, Lavianjas, no Soul Catcher, none of that shit, because you put on Whispers of Infinity. You can just always press the button and refresh it. It's very, very convenient. As for the rings here, you kind of just need Grace Effect synth rings, get as much ES, attributes, you know, whatever resistances you might need. Pretty straightforward here. You can craft strength, dex, or whatever attributes. This is really, really where you want to get your attributes, really. And then you put on a Gray String of Servitude. It's just the biggest damage multiplier for an armor stacker. Last, pretty straightforward. We need a Sorrow of the Divine so we can benefit from the Druggery's recovery. We have a Stibnite for the Suppression and Evasion, Jade boards so we can move around. Very straightforward. I do prefer using Flagellant's Prefix. I think it's very, very powerful, especially when you're, you know, in a ton of mobs. Then you definitely want Armor and Evasion suffixes for your Aegis. The other two can be really whatever suffixes. If you want Curse Reduction, you can do it. If you want, you know, Shock Reduction, you can do that as well. It's really up to you. Quickly going over any of the interesting bits about the jewels. We've gone over most of these jewels. These are just, you know, RMR jewels with spell block. The Thread of Hope is allowing us to pick up Divine Shield and Glancing Blows very point efficiently. Intuitive Leap lets you skip over to Charisma, of course. Watcher's Eye with the disc mod to cap out our spell block is pretty mandatory here. It is extremely hard and or point inefficient to get spell block capped without this Watcher's Eye, and the rest are just clusters in the Light of Meaning. Going over the socket groups here, we have opted to put, once again, the Grace inside the helmet because it is always going to be on. With our current setup with a perfectly crafted helmet, it's going to be a level 21 Grace, which is extremely good. Start to get a lot of diminishing returns past level 30, so getting it to 30, 31, you know, is kind of where you want to be at. And then the other defensive auras we're putting in the helmet are Determ and Disc, of course. As for the boot setup, we want to put a big Smite and a big Wrath in here. In the boots with a +2 Corruption and a level 4 Empower, we are going to be getting a level 35 Wrath, which is, of course, a ton of flat damage. And then we can put the Smite in here to get a ton of levels as well. This is level 32. You can use a Vol Smite version. If you're in a Blight and, you know, a bunch of bosses have just spawned, you can press the Vol Smite, give yourself a huge damage steroid. It's a lot better than the normal Smite, so it's very, very worth putting in here. You have flat auras in the gloves. You can balance these to consume all of the mana. Just, you know, if you can, you have the extra room, put it in. If you don't, then down level this. Just know it is worth leveling a high level precision on the Aurabot here because the accuracy will go a long way on the Storm Rider boots. So do make an effort to try and get a high level precision on the Aurabot. And then we do have all of our purities and our last defensive aura, which is Vitality, all in the chest piece linked to an Enlighten 4. There is a single Enlighten 4 in this build, and the Enlighten 4 is only necessary if you want extremely high level flat auras. If you can compromise a little bit on the flat auras, you can definitely have a level 3 Enlighten or even a level 2 Enlighten here goes a long way, but you do have to compromise a lot on your flat auras. Otherwise, it's extremely easy to fit everything in here. The last two socket groups, we have Flame Dash just so we can get around obstacles. We have Vol Cyclone because we are planning on doing Blight and we want to suck everything into the Invigoration Towers, so put it on here. Phase Run just so we have a consistent source of phasing outside of the flasks. Also gives you a little bit of movement speed, but you know, this is just fluff stuff, right? Last thing you can put in here is just a very, very free thing you can do on Aurabot is to do a Portal High Impact Mine Minefield. This doesn't reserve any mana or ES or anything, so we can just throw the Portal Mine. The High Impact Mine buff will give us guaranteed double damage to any monsters that are inside the AoE. If you by chance are coming across a monster that's not instantly dying, you can chuck the Portal Mines at it and it'll basically take double damage. It's just very, very good thing to throw in here. If you need this single target, it's there. If not, don't even bother throwing these. Anyways, that goes over the Aurabot and all of the changes. Basically, we're going more heavy into Grace, and we are, once again, going back to using March of the Legion because Whispers of Infinity exists. I think it's a very, very, very good option these days. Now, let's talk about Mana Guardian. Now, usually I gloss over Mana Guardian every league because there really aren't any changes, and once again, there really aren't that many balance changes, especially to Guardian. So just know this build is going to be mostly the same. There is one thing interesting to mention, however, and that is the only ascendancy you really need on Guardian is Radiant Faith. So if there are any Bloodline ascendancies that are extremely good after they do the releases, you know, it could be possible that you cut all of these points and, you know, you take all of the Bloodline ascendancy if you do find something interesting. And I mean, this is really the only 2-pointer you need on Guardian, right? Otherwise, it's a pretty cookie cutter, cheaply put together Mana Guardian build that does Soul Link. There's not a whole lot to talk about here, so we're just going to move on to the last build, which is going to be the Culler. Now, the most interesting change on the patch to Culler is, of course, going to be the fact that you can now equip 3 rings. It is now more rarity efficient efficient to drop your belt, which is only 90 rarity, and pick up a ring like this, which is Calandra Reflected. I think if this is on a gold base and you get a really good reflection, you can get something like 140% rarity if it's just Bis. So know that the belt is probably a non-competitive slot anymore, and so you drop your 2 passive points on the Ascendancy here, which is Master Alchemist, to grab a 3rd ring, and we've just added the 103% on a 3rd ring here to match the other rings I have on. Now, the 3rd ring is also important because we are going to be doing an Invigoration Blight strategy. This Empowering Tower 25% AOE stack, and if we have 3 rings, you should be able to anoint 3 of them and get an increased AOE on the Empowering Tower, which will make the Invigoration strat even better. So just make sure that the Culler is the one clicking the Invigoration Towers so that you have the biggest AOE and you have the most potential overlaps while doing the Blight strategy. Otherwise, there isn't a ton of flexibility in the gearing here. Simply just putting on an Eclipse Solaris, Wheel of the Storm Sail, get rarity, double rarity on the helmet. Freeze Embrace, Orsi's Wonder Trap are just all mandatory and best in slots. Amulet with rarity, rings with rarity, and then you have Flask with rarity. There is one thing to mention, and I'll reiterate how the Battle Within Tincture works. This is an interaction that's somewhat new, so I'll try and reiterate how this works for people who don't know. So tinctures by default only work on melee weapons. They do not work on ranged weapons. And so this tincture, you can build stacks with a Battle Within, and it inflicts a mana burn on yourself when you hit an enemy with a melee weapon. So what you do is you weapon swap. I have a melee weapon on. You can choose any melee weapon. And now I hit stuff with my Lightning Strike. What I want to do is build enough stacks to be capped out on the Battle Within. Once you have those 20 stacks, you weapon swap back to your main hand, and now you're on a ranged weapon. The ranged weapon cannot build any more stacks, and you can benefit from the rarity as long as you can maintain the 20 stacks of life burn from Blood-Soaked Blade. It's a very, very manageable debuff. It's just 20% of your life per second, and since you are a Pathfinder clicking all the flask nodes, you have your own personal life flask here. You can maintain the debuff pretty easily. As you can see, I'm recovering 7,300 life per second. Now, the tankiness on this character mainly comes from its passive tree. It has a lot of room to just click a bunch of life all over the tree. It can get suppress cap by clicking as many suppression stuff as it wants. You can also click a bunch of block nodes over here. You have a ton of points to do a lot of stuff for your defenses. The other thing you have to do is reserve half of your life and go low life. So here I'm reserving 54%, and with the mastery, I'm at, considered low life at 55. And then you have a ton of mitigation coming from Pet Blood and Progenesis. Combined with all of the party buffs, your max hit is going to be through the roof. And that's kind of it for most of the gearing. There's not a whole lot of choice to be made on Culler. It's mainly just equip the highest rarity, of course. And then, of course, it's important knowing about the Battle Within interaction with a melee weapon. The cluster jewel here is not too important. The best jewel you can get is Prodigious Defense Riot Queller to help your block situation, but these are extremely fucking hard to craft. So if you can't get this particular jewel, you can either just get one notable, or you can get a Mage Hunter notable to help your spell block if you need it. And then I have an Anti-Venom in to help Chaos Cap. This is a really, really easy way to help get Chaos Res. And then we need one Spiked Concoction for the Flask effect here. And then Peak Vigor is just a lot of Flask recovery rate here. And the last bit of block comes from a Prodigious Defense here. As for the skills, there's not a whole lot interesting going on here. This is the bearer of the Animate Guardian. It's a 4-link AG Meat Shield Minion Life Ray Spectre. There is a gear set for the AG here. You can see what we typically like to equip on the AG. As a movement setup here, it has a Tempest Shield for the block, and then it has a guard skill with Vault Discipline if it needs it. The main culling setup here is going to be KB with item rarity, and now the best coverage links are going to be GMP Fork Return. These 3 links will basically make KB cover the screen, and they go just every direction, and then they fork, and you just have so much coverage with this particular setup. And then the last thing you want to put in is Culling Strike, of course. All right, that goes over most of the builds. Now, there's a few more topics to cover, and that is going to be how we in the 6-man are going to be leveling all of these builds, and when we are going to transition to the 6-man party. And the last 2 things to talk about are going to be trio or duo builds, and then we'll do an FAQ at the very end. Now, first things first, I think the best trio low-level farming group is going to be the Ascendant, one of the Guardians, and one of the Rangers. So those 3 can play, whatever bow or wand shit they want to do. Start off with Explosive Concoction and Campaign, pivot to bows or wands, and then you're just farming low-level content. I think it's best to do an essence-focused strategy because of the nerf to Rogue Exiles. I don't think Rogue Exiles will be worth farming early on with Ruckus, as they have been in prior leagues after the nerfs, so I think we're going to be doing an essence-focused strategy early on. We're just going to be running the trio of a Ranger, Guardian, and an Ascendant, and the Guardian can kind of go a pseudo Aurabot early on, and the Ascendant can, wear Tripanon and have like a really powerful smite and, do all of that really CBT stuff early to get a bunch of damage. So that means we have 3 solo characters, and that is going to be both duelists, which is, Slayer or Champion, whatever you want to league start, and then a 3rd Ranger. Obviously, Ranger is going to be really powerful with like a bow league start or doing concoctions. There's a ton of viable leveling stuff on Ranger. It's most likely going to be explosive concoction into wands is what I think a lot of people are going to be doing. So we're probably going to be following suit and doing explosive concoction into wands on the Ranger. And then of course on the two duelists, the most obvious thing to be playing and leveling with on these two characters is going to be slams, and it's of course going to be Earthshatter. There's a ton of Earthshatter guides, material, this kind of thing for solo play and pushing. And so I'll direct you guys to some of the guys that I think are good for these kind of leveling builds. And the goal is for the trio, which is the Aurabot, the champion, and the Ranger here, to farm as much currency as possible on the first day or day and a half so that you are accumulating wealth in order to try and do your transition. And the other three people are playing solo, and they're sharing map completions, and they're also trying to make as much money as possible in order to complete the transition. When there's enough gear on the market and you feel like you've accumulated enough wealth, you want to dump all your money, buy all your gear, convert to the 6-man, and do your farming strat. That's how we approach it. Because if you try and transition too early, there's a couple problems. One, there's not enough gear in order to be able to do hard content like Titanic Blight or whatever you want to do. And two, there aren't enough mapping supplies to sustain high juice strategies until the rest of the community kind of catches up. So we're doing a bit of stalling, right? Just farming whatever low-level content you want to do, just making money, accumulating wealth in order to buy the gear for the 6-man. And that's kind of how we're approaching leveling and what we're going to be doing. Now, as for duo and trio builds, I want to point you guys over to ItsFineOkay's little spreadsheet here. These are compiled builds from the community. These are not my builds, I will reiterate, but there are a lot of really good builds in here, and I definitely trust ItsFineOkay and the people that are all hanging out on Halo's Discord to make good builds for people. There are very good duo and trio options in here, and one piece of advice I would give you for 2 or 3-man is to not go armor stacker unless you are specifically planning on going and doing a blight strategy. So TLDR, if you want to do blight or you want to do Titanic specifically, then armor stacker is a good option, but just know that in all other sorts of content, other carries like, wands, bows, or even spells can do just as good. So there are a variety of options here. You can flip through them. There's also progression POBs. I think this is a really good resource if you're not so familiar with group play. This will be very, very good. And if you want a good community to ask questions about Aurabot stuff, I'll leave a discussion or a link to this discussion channel, which is HaloBot's Discord. This is where a lot of people hang out and talk about Aurabot group play stuff. This is a very good place to ask questions about any of these builds. And once again, I will shout out Haloplasm here. I'll link to his YouTube channel as well. I'm not sure if he's playing this league, but historically he has done very, very good duo POBs. So if you're looking for duo content, definitely look out for his POBs as well. And now, last thing to talk about is going to be the FAQ. So I'll read this out for you guys, but this is also in Halo's Discord. So here's the 3.27 sheet, which I'll link in the description as well. And, for larger parties, usually people like to look to me because, I'm not really the only one doing like 6-man content. So for what carries you should play, for beginners, we recommend any spell such as Spark, Penance Brand. Otherwise, attack archetypes like wands or bows are your second best. For trio or content that requires a lot of damage, assuming you are an advanced player, we recommend Armor Stacker, which is that I'm playing, right? Your Aurabot is built differently if you are playing a spellcaster, and in that case, you want to use a spell-based Aurabot. Otherwise, you're using an attack-based or grace stacking Aurabot. There is an armor-specific Aura Stacker in the links as well. There is a cooked build, which I will disclaimer as well. This is a banner bot duo. It is a little bit cooked and really only good if you're focusing on doing blight only. Please do not play this Aurabot unless you're very set on doing blight and you know how cancer this build is to play. Last league, Champion was suggested by a lot of people, but I think Champion and Scion are very, very close in power. And I do think with the new Bloodline Ascendancies, if there's a strong 2-pointer, I think Scion will be very good as well. They're both powerful options and they both have their ups and downs. And I personally lean Scion, but I know other people lean Champion. Guardian is not a great option in today's meta because outside of racing and, a day 1 or 2 scenario, you're really just better off playing Champion or Scion in that case. And the question everybody asks is, what do I play in a duo, trio, 4-man, 5-man? The role priority changes based on your party size between trio and up, but it's consistent past trio. So your first 3 are going to be a little bit flexible depending on the content you're running and, what kind of things you want to focus and prioritize. But if you're in a 4-man plus, it's going to be pretty consistently Carry, Aura, Druggery, Crybot, Culler, Mana Guardian. And these are the things that you're going to be focusing on, as your 6-man priority. However, as a trio, you do have a lot of choices. If you already have a champion in your party, you simply add the Druggery Crybot hybrid setup, which is the thing that I've linked there. There's also a little bit more of a trimmed version in ItsFineOkay sheet if you're looking for a trio champion setup or a trio Druggery Crybot. If you do not have a champion, there are a few options you can use. The first one is the hybrid setup, which we mentioned before. The second one is a Crybot Fortify hybrid, which is similar to the build that we played last league. It provides a lot of raw damage via the war cries, and it has a massive amount of fortification and damage. You can also throw extra mines for your party if you need as well. You can also swap your Aurabot to champion, and then you simply add a Crybot Druggery hybrid. So all of these options are very good, but we do kind of recommend people that are new or maybe not as familiar to go with option 1, which is a Crybot Druggery hybrid setup. There are reasons for all 3 options, but you kind of make this decision based on what you're farming. For leveling these builds, everybody's going to be recommending you go Explosive Concoction or Poison Concoction in the campaign. You simply just want to be playing the most powerful build possible because respecking is just so easy now with gold. You really should just learn how to play one of the more powerful specs and then respec later. Alternatively, you can go Deadeye leveling, which is linked here, and then Armor Brand Cremation for Templar, which is shown here as well. And as for Inquisitor, which was previously the most popular spell-based carry, Inquisitor is a fine option, but I do think most people for spell-based builds are leaning Elementalist because the Golem builds with all of the Golem buffs are extremely good, but just know that Inquisitor is a perfectly fine option well if you want to play Templar. Anyways, that goes over, most of the FAQs, the questions that we get asked a lot. Hopefully that helps you guys out. Once again, I'll link all of those things in the description to help you guys out if you have any questions. I like to hang out in Halo's Discord. If you want to ping me with any questions, I'm happy to answer. There's a lot of discussion that goes on in there as well. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the league. I think there'll be some cool stuff. It's tough to say whether or not ground loot will be fucking terrible, but it does look a little bit Monka-esque with all of the nerfs, but we're going to give it a try. We're going to see how it goes. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. I'll try to answer as many people as I can. And once again, I'm Snap, and thanks for watching.